And joining us now to take a look at the weather forecast for the week ahead, we welcome in Eric Snodgrass of Nutrien. Eric, great to catch up with you this week, sir. How are you?
I'm better than last week. I got stranded because of storms for 3 days last week in three different airports, and so I'm just happy to be home. Although I'll tell you something, they canceled my flights out of Washington D.C. because of lightning, and it was a bit odd because a lot of people in the airport were complaining about why it's just a little lightning. Well, just so they understand this, there were actually three people killed in D.C. because of that lightning while we were there.
Mm.
And I want to remind them that when you think about these lightning strikes and what they can do, it turns out on average, every single aircraft in the U.S. commercial fleet struck once a year. So don't mess around with it. I was kind of telling those folks, I'm like, hey, this is kind of what happens this time of year. We saw a lot of storms like that over the weekend that hit uh, Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, the East Coast, down in the Southeast, and each one of them contained just a tremendous amount of lightning. So it was a pretty stormy weekend.
It definitely was a stormy weekend. Well, glad you are home safe as
Me
well.
too.
Let's focus on that stormy weekend, though. An area that I think is very key is the Central Corn Belt, the Western Corn Belt, and we got some of those rains that were in the forecast to verify, but it appeared like it was a pretty narrow band of heavy rain from, say, the Sioux Falls area across northern Iowa into Wisconsin, Illinois. What did you see from those weekend rains and some of that heavy rain that we saw in certain areas?
Well, that strip you just talked about had 2 to 8 inches of rainfall. I was supposed to actually go to Freeport, Illinois tonight for a Dynagrow event with Nutrien, and we had to cancel it this morning because it was all rained out and washed out. And although my wife teased me, she's like, "Well, you have an old boat. Why don't you take it up there?" And I said, "Well, it was. I mean, where the corn's standing, it can take that amount of rain, but unfortunately, it causes local flooding in certain places. But it was huge. Those rains are going to carry those areas all the way through the rest of this year and hopefully produce some huge yields. But it's important to see who didn't get it. So, very sporadic rains across Nebraska. Southern Iowa did not get this precipitation. West Central Illinois missed out on some of this precipitation. So you had a significant portion of the Corn Belt, and I should throw in Kansas as well, a significant portion of the Corn Belt that had tons of rain and a big area that did not. And so overall, we still have substantial risk in places like those areas I just mentioned. But boy, it just feels like in the last 2 weeks, when it decides to rain, there's no such thing as a half inch anymore, right? It feels like you're going to get 6, 7 inches of rain in certain places, and it's been quite devastating to some locations.
Well, and on the flip side of that, Eric, I was going to throw this out to you as well. Saw and heard from some farmers in north central Iowa, right where that strip went through. They got like 5 inches of rain, and they said normally they'd have water standing in their draw, their little run through their field. They said it was bone dry after the rain. So I think that goes to show just how badly some of those areas did need some of that rainfall, Eric.
Oh yeah, soil moisture values before this were between 2 and 10%. And the beauty of the corn and soybean plant is that they are so effective at taking that water and putting it into the soil, right where they need it. So you're right. You probably saw folks that got 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, and then you come back, 24 or 36 hours later, like, wait a minute, didn't it just rain 4 inches here? Well, that crop takes the moisture in and uses it. So it tells you how thirsty the crop was at that point.
Well, and you mentioned some of the have not areas as well. As we look at the forecast ahead for this week, it seems like, we've had a bit of a moderating of temperatures for a couple of days, but we're going to get back to more hot and dry weather. It doesn't look like there's a lot of rain in the forecast this week. Is that true?
Now we got this sagging front that heads east, so that's going to keep things in like the Tennessee and the Ohio Valley stormy today, tomorrow, and maybe possibly some storms in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. They'll take anything they can get down there. In fact, I was looking this morning. Texas is on pace for its like third driest year on record, which means they're rivaling the '50s drought and the drought of the 1930s, plus what happened in 2011. So it's good to see chances of storms coming through parts of the area. But then after that, the ridge opens back up and slides to the west. And what that does is that really just puts a lot of dry conditions in the central United States once again. We're going to see high pressure build in, and the temperature is going to ratchet back up. So maybe by the end of this week, we're talking about triple digit heat in the Western Corn Belt again. And again, I'm mostly concerned about the state of Nebraska, Kansas. Those are areas that missed out on the rains, see the heat return, And I was just there last week, and they said if we don't get rain now, our dryland areas are going to see significant yield loss.
And I've even heard of some silage cutters going in some of those areas already. So I think that speaks to just the situation that is developing and continuing to develop in the Western Corn Belt. Eric, as we look as well, what about globally? Anything South America, anything Europe wise that we need to keep an eye on still?
They had another heat wave in Europe, and in South America, we're kind of at that point where we're saying, when does the monsoon start? Is it going to start on time? Because I mean, they're going to be planting in 5 weeks, right? I mean, it's September 15. That's their green light to start planting in like Mato Grosso. Some of the long range forecast data, which was just released, continues to point at some risk of being drier in southern Brazil and Argentina. And know that over the last 2 to 3 months, Argentina's winter has been much drier than normal. So there's a lot of moisture that needs to be recovered before South America even starts thinking about this next growing season going into their spring, of course, which is our fall. La Nina, I'll be honest with you, this thing has outperformed all expectations. I just looked at ocean temperatures this morning. It shows very, symptomatic of how strong the trade winds are across the central equatorial Pacific. So I think we're going to be talking La Nina going all the way through fall and into early winter. And then the other wild card with all of this is the tropics. National Hurricane Center finally today has identified an area that's got a 40% chance of developing into something, be it a tropical depression, but it's just south of the Cabo Verde Islands, which are just off of Africa, which means this isn't a U.S. threat right now. But normally August is the month we talk about things cranking up. We reach a peak in mid-September on the hurricane season, and while this particular year has been, quite inactive, we could really just move ourselves into a very active time period where all of a sudden tropical system shows up. Now, who wants it? Texas wants it. Texas would love nothing more than a slow mover to come and just sit over the area. But there's also been some drop redevelopment in parts of like Georgia, the coastal Carolinas that really need to see some better moisture there as well.
Well, Eric, fantastic stuff as always. Any other final thoughts? Anything we missed here this week?
Well, you did miss the new update from the Farmer's Almanac. so so I joke about it, but it's kind of funny. And a meteorologist, I forget where she's from, her name's Hannah Strong, pointed out something really important. I'm going to put it in my in-depth report tonight. It turns out that they reuse the same map every year and just change the words over the top of it. And it kind of just goes to tell you that if you're still using that for your seasonal prediction, maybe we should look at something a little different here. I'm not sure which is better, the woolly worms, the groundhog, or the Farmer's Almanac at this point, but we'll give that a good look and see if it means anything for this upcoming winter, and we'll just go from there.
I like that. I think we will just have to go from there. With that, with a look at this week's weather forecast, Eric Snodgrass of Nutrien. Always a pleasure, sir. Have a great week.
Yep, you too.